or than the other, or one foot the toes touch in different ways. Maybe you feel your one foot would make more of an impression if you were in soft sand. Let your arms hang by your side, so you're kind of standing and look forwards, not necessarily to the ground, because any direction of your eyes when you're standing is going to influence what's happening in your spine. Now shift your weight a little bit more onto one leg, one foot. And just notice how you do that. So you really feel more clearly the weight on more weight on one foot than the other. Which leg did you choose? And notice, how do you bring yourself over that leg? What's the sense of yourself from your foot to your head, top of your head, when you come over that leg? So it's not about lifting the other leg off. It's just about bringing your weight more onto one leg. Do you have any sense that you get taller? Or do you get shorter? It's not really that your actual height changes, that you would be measured at, but in space, does your head get a little more away from the floor as you go over onto one leg? Or does it come closer to the floor? It may be something that, or maybe your head tilts to one side. How much movement of your head in space is there when you bring your weight onto this foot? And what's happening through your torso? Between your hip joint and your shoulders. So we were looking at that distance yesterday, Loretta, in the C curve, the distance between the lower ribs and the pelvis. Does that change when you bring your weight onto this leg, or does it stay the same? Is there any change in the curve of your spine? And then bring yourself back to the middle for a moment and just notice if there's any hangover effect or shadow of having shifted your weight more onto one side than the other. And then do the same exploration on your other side, your other leg. So keep your foot on the ground. The foot that you're leaving, but the foot you're leaving, you don't need to actually lift it away from the ground. The weight will lessen on it, but it doesn't need to lift. And then you can pay attention. Do you feel more connected or safer? Might be one thing that you might feel, or less safe, stable, less stable on this leg? And what contributes to that? What happens in terms of where your hip joint moves to relative to your foot in space? Do you take the side you're going to, do you move your hip joint so that a plumb line would drop outside of your ankle? Or does your hip joint stay above your foot and you do something in your torso? And there's many things that you could do in your torso. You could lean like a lamppost. Or you might feel some sort of banana-y shape, or a little change or shift through the length of your spine. Okay, enough concentration. Where are the smiles? Lie on your back. Then notice what you sense about how your right leg, what you feel in your right side of you, your right leg, its length from your heel to your hip joint. The length of your right side between your hip joint and your shoulder. And the length of your left leg. From your heel to your hip joint. And from your hip joint to your shoulder. Does one leg feel longer than the other? And does one length between your shoulder and your hip joint on one side and the other, one of those lengths feel a little longer or a little shorter than the other side? And if you do sense that one leg you have the impression of it feeling shorter or longer, is it on the same side as the side that you feel the length is less between your shoulder and hip, or is it on the opposite side? You know, there are so many possibilities, combinations and permutations in how we can organize ourselves. Which could be incredibly complex if you thought you had to know them all or understand them all. But one of the wonderful things about the Feldenkrais method is that it's a process of inquiry. And it's actually that process of asking questions, shifting attention, and becoming aware of what's happening that actually creates a shift in the state of the nervous system that can allow something else to emerge. And yes, we do ask questions within a framework of our understanding of what is possible in human movement. And that makes the inquiry even more potent. But it never ceases to amaze me when I'm working in my practice that how impactful and how much difference it can make when I'm not trying to change someone, when I'm simply listening and helping them sense themselves, helping them find new ways of attending to themselves so that the learning emerges from within them. And what makes their profession such a great profession is that we get to learn all the time too. So there's never a dull moment, so they say. Could you roll over and lie on your right side? Now, I would suggest you lie on your left side if you can, and do it with your right side first. This was to one person. That was to one person. So everyone else is lying on their right side. Unless you have an acute injury or pain somewhere in your right side that makes it difficult or challenging for you to lie on your right side, and then you could reverse the instructions too. So you can support your head with your hand, you can or arm, or you could get a towel and support your head so that you feel like you're lying more comfortably. And again, as you land on your side, what does lying on your side mean to you? What shape are you making? Is it sitting on a chair with an upright back kind of shape? Or is it a curled up, more fetal shape? What's the angle between your thighs and your knees? So here's where using your senses to inform you, as well as your capacity for visually imagining are both useful. And the more references we have, the more likely it is that our sensing ourselves is closer to the reality of our situation. So have your hips and knees comfortably bent, but your hips a little less than a right angle. So most of you are actually lying in that way. There's a few that have a right angle between their thighs and the torso, but most are lying more or less that. So the feet aren't too close to the buttocks, the knees aren't close to the abdomen, and it's a position where you feel like you're not rolling forwards or backwards. Your left hand can be on the floor or anywhere you like. Feel the weight of your left leg on your right leg. Where do you feel the contact? Between your left foot and your right foot, your left knee and your right knee, your thighs, your calves. How much of your left leg, inside of your left leg, do you feel resting on your right leg? And then how much of your right leg do you feel resting on the floor, in contact with the floor? What about your right side, the right side of your pelvis, right side of your ribs, your right shoulder and the right side of your head? So you're taking a checklist or a scan of yourself to begin with. Would you now lift your left leg, your whole left leg, away from your right leg just a little bit and bring it back down? So feel the weight of your leg as you lift it. Notice the height that you lift your leg to, or the distance it travels away from your other leg. Can you lift your knee and foot simultaneously so that they lift the same amount with the same timing? And each time you lower your leg, rest it completely. And begin to attend to what do you lift your leg? So don't hold it there. We're not doing levitation or suspended movements. As soon as you've lifted your leg, lower it. How do you know when the ending of your movement of lifting has happened so that you're changing directions and you're lowering your leg to rest again? So notice what's happening in your right leg, in your back, in your stomach. And so people are still hovering their legs. We're not hovering here. It's awareness through movement. So it's not pausing in the lifted position. It's lift your leg and then stop lifting and lower your leg. Next time you lower your leg, pause a moment and notice, do you change your way of breathing? So we're going to be doing lifting the leg many, 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 many times. And our legs are quite heavy. So if you lift and hold, you're going to be learning to exercise in a way that's perhaps not connected to learning. Rest a moment. So now come back to lifting your leg, but slowly. There you go. That's what I really wanted to say. It's as if you're not going to separate your legs, but you're going to unweight your left leg. But you're still going to keep the skin touching. So it's as if you had chewing gum between your legs. So you feel yourself beginning to mobilizing to lift your leg and lightening your leg, the weight, the pressure on your right leg, but not actually lifting it away, not separating your legs. And then let that go really slowly. And notice what doing it like that brings to your attention in terms of sensation and movement. Can you do this without holding your breath, without changing your resting way of breathing in any way? Okay, pause. This time, keep your knees in contact. So don't separate your knees, and lift your left foot away from your right foot and bring it back down. And notice how you do that. What do you feel? What sensations of movement do you feel in your foot, in your ankle, in your lower leg? Is there anything happening in your hip joint, or your pelvis, your lower lumbar spine? Does it change? Lifting your leg change the way the right side of you relates to the floor? Does it vary? It could very subtly change the contact between your head and your arm, or your head and the support. Don't hover. It's not hover the leg or hover the foot lesson. So each time you lower your foot, you pause a minute. You feel yourself. It's as important to feel yourself, sense yourself giving up the work, as it is to feel how you're doing it and where the work's happening. In fact, for some people, it can be easier to notice what was happening by the sensations of letting go than it can be of the sensations in the activation. So what informs you of how high to go? How high do you think a normal or averagely normal foot would lift in this way, lower leg would lift in this way? Okay, pause. Leave your leg resting on your other one. Now this time you're going to lift your foot again, but doing it in a way that your heel lifts first. So that your your toes will stay touching while you feel your left heel moving away from your right heel. Then you continue to lift your heel until the toes break contact with your right foot. And then you lift comfortably, then lower your lower leg again so your toes touch first, and then your heel comes to rest on your right foot. So pay attention whether your toes are really hanging, whether your foot is soft. There's no work, unnecessary work going on in the toes to try and help you do the movement. And notice if you're doing the movement to do it well or for your own pleasure, for your own investigation, without holding your breath. Pause. This time, could you lift your foot and lower leg with your little toe leading, with your toe end of your foot leading? So that means your big toe will break contact with your foot before your heel, if that's possible for you. Your knees are staying in contact. You're staying on your side. And you're thinking of lifting, leading with your toe end of your foot. Your knees stay in contact. Your knees don't separate. And then your heel comes back to touch your foot first, and then your toes settle down, lower down, and give their weight to rest on top of your right foot. Can you do the leading with your toe end of your foot without straining in your ankle, but making it feel light or easy? Maybe you do less. It's such a temptation to do as much as we can, to feel like we've got it. Oh, I really know I'm doing it because I feel that sensation of strain, which can be so familiar to all of us. Next time your foot comes down, pause. And then lift your foot once with your heel leaving the other heel, and come back down. And then the next time, lift with your toes leading and come back down. So you're alternating, leading once with your heel to lift your foot and lower leg with your knees touching, and then once with your toes. So where do you feel that? Could you make it a little faster? So your knee is not unbending. Your foot is not going forwards of your right foot. It's simply lifting away from it. That's it. How quickly could you do this? Think of doing it less well. The constraint is that you don't hold your breath and you keep your knees in contact. Simpler, nimbler. So it's not tapping your foot on top of the other foot. It's once the heel lifts first, then the heel lowers and the toes lift first. So keep your foot on your other foot and do it. Heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe. No, now you're doing it quicker. So it's heel, toe. Can you keep your foot? Okay, lift your foot away from your other foot. Keep it in the air. And now alternate the movement of lifting your heel and lifting it. Keep it off. So keep your foot at the same height. And lift once your heel, once your toe, once your heel, once your toe. And then put your foot back down on your other foot and do it here. Heel lifts, toe lifts, heel lifts, toe lifts. So it's as if you're rolling across the inside edge of your foot. Lots of curious things happening. It's interesting how our feet can prove to be not as under our voluntary control as we think. Okay, leave that, roll onto your back and rest. So feel your difference in the way of lying. First, from just being on your side and doing those actions so many times. And then the influence of those movements on how you perceive, how you sense your left side and your right side. Which leg feels longer? What direction are your feet pointing in? What's the distance between your toes, left foot to right foot, and what's the distance between your heels? Does it feel like the leg that you've been exploring is either more rolled out, turned out, little toe edges closer to the floor, or more turned towards the ceiling? Either's possible depending on your organization previously. But often if you've got very strong muscles, active muscles in this leg, you'll feel that this can change the tonus, so your leg will possibly roll outward a little more. And if you have a very loose hip leg, so to speak, very flexible, do lots of yoga type things, it's possible that your foot could be more turned towards the ceiling. Okay, please come back onto your right side. Same position. This time, keep your feet touching and lift your left knee away from your right knee and bring it back down. Notice what happens when you do that. What happens in your hip joint? What happens in your pelvis? What happens with your contact with the floor? Do you feel the influence, the echo of this movement in the contact of your head, or how your head relates to the surface it's lying on? Next time your knees are touching, stay there. And now you're going to explore alternating the two movements. So once, lift your foot and keeping your knees touching, then lower your foot and separate your knees. So it's like a seesaw movement. Once your feet separate, and then once your knees separate. So when your foot lifts, your knee stays lying on the other knee. When your knee lifts, your foot stays in contact. You may even feel an increase of pressure between your left foot and your right foot. How are you breathing? Do you feel any change in contact between the right side of your pelvis and the floor? Any change in shape in your lower back or along the length of your spine? Okay, pause. Now lift your whole leg. Just lift. That's not both legs. Your whole leg, your whole right leg, lift it away and bring it back down. So everything at the same height, and just notice how you lift your leg now. Is it any different than when you first lifted it? Has it got lighter? Has it got heavier? Okay, and rest a moment. It's always a question. How many times do we do a movement or explore a variation on ourselves or with someone else And there are many factors that influence that. But one thing that we want to avoid is repetition for repetition's sake. That in the Feldenkrais method, we're exploring, we're using an exploratory process so that if you're continued to be curious about the same thing or something different, it will change very slightly the way you do the movement each time. So you won't simply be exercising with repetition. Come back to your right side. Then I'll explain what you're going to do before you actually do it. You lift your leg, everything at the same height. You're going to keep your leg lifted and then do a movement of only in the ankle, of bending and flexing and extending your ankle. Simply that. So it's not lifting your toes to the ceiling now or lifting your heel to the ceiling. It's bending your ankle so that the top of your foot comes closer to your shin, and then extending your ankle so your top of your foot moves away from your shin. And make it light and simple, and notice which direction is easier. Can you make it feel light? And rest. Rest your leg down. So most people that looked, 95% of the room, did keep the other joints relatively quiet in space and just move the ankle. Now, could you lift your leg again the same way? You're going to keep your ankle quiet and just bend and extend your knee a little bit. Doesn't need to be a lot. The purpose is to find out, can you maintain the relative position of your hip and your ankle while you open and close your knee? And breathing, of course. Great. Okay, rest. So this is like shining a spotlight on each relationship. Ankle and lower leg and thigh. And now we're going to spotlight the hip. So keeping the ankle and the knee in the same angle and relationship that they are now, lift your whole leg and see, can you do a movement in your hip joint? So that means your knee will, your thigh, your leg will move relative to your torso. Your knee will move in the direction of your head. That's bending in your hip joint. And then your knee will move down below your other knee and maybe a bit behind, which is extending your hip joint. But the angle of your knee stays unchanged if possible. Good. Great. And rest. Rest your left leg on top of your right leg. So what do you think we might do next? We've looked at the relative movement in the ankle and the knee and the hip, spotlighting the sensation of movement in each of them so that your image of moving yourself in that place might be a little clearer. So how about we combine the movements? So lift your left leg away from your right leg. But the constraint here, so lift everything to the same height as it was when it's lying, which means your foot doesn't lift higher than your knee. And begin to make a very small movement where you're bending in the ankle, bending in your knee, and bending in your hip at the same time and the same amount. And then extending in the hip, extending in the knee, and extending in the ankle. So this is where it gets much more complex. And how are you breathing right now? Okay, rest a moment. So you know you can rest whenever you want. But now what's interesting about this variation is that usually people move the part that they know how to the part of themselves that they know how to use well, they'll move that part or that place 5 times as much as anywhere else. And not register that the relationship isn't changing elsewhere. So come back to that movement and pay attention. Listen to yourself. From the starting position of this semi-bent leg, can you bend every joint a little bit more at the same rate? That means your hip bends, your knee bends, your ankle bends at the same time. The angles, the same change in them. So all the angles are opening at changing at the same rate and the same amount. So some people still moving, unbending and bending the knee a lot, and very little movement in the hip joint. Some people moving the hip joint a lot and no movement in the knee. So you might need to reduce the size of the movement to be able to listen to the places that you're moving, to observe whether you're really doing what you think you're doing or whether you're doing something else. And so when we visualize, we can create, if we use a visual image, we can create any image we want. But that may not be actually what we're doing with ourselves. So you need to listen to the sensations of movement that are coming from you to see if they fit with what you might be visualizing. Can you sense what you're doing in all 3 joints at the same time? And in the rest of yourself? And leave it. Roll over and rest on your back. And it takes time to, if it's not an organization or an action that you're familiar with, or possibly not used for a very long time, you cannot do it immediately. You have to learn how to do it. And when we're learning, where we can be acknowledging our intention, feeling, sensing the sensations, seeing if they're creating the organization that matches with our intention. Trying to do it easily and lightly. Because when we try and achieve, it's easier for our attention to get caught. Both caught on a location, on a detail, and to activate the ways of moving that we already know how to do well. Moshe loved to say, you've spent a lifetime without doing these movements. What's so important about them now? You can live life without them. But you'll learn to live life better and more comfortably for yourself if you can take the time to learn something now. So that one I'm not sure. So I'm being asked about one of the movements because someone might have tranced out. Are you asking about the differentiation of the hip from the other? Okay. So when you moving the hip and keeping the angle the same elsewhere, then your thigh will be moving, your knee will be close towards you and then more footward. So it moves headward, footward. Lie on the same side again. And this time, softly stay on your side, but softly lengthen your left leg. So you're going to, your foot will move footward away from the direction of your head. So your leg straightens a little. But the word straighten often is associated with stiffness or work. So straighten your leg a comfortable amount. Keep it long but soft. Lift it away from your other leg. Bend your ankle only. So it's more like a standing foot, the relationship of your foot to your lower leg. And then begin to move your leg, whole leg, a little forwards of you and a little backwards of you in a small range, a bit like your leg was a pendulum and it would be swinging a little forwards and a little bit backwards. So you maintain the angle of your ankle and feel what's happening through yourself. What's the range where you can make this feel? So now some people are moving the leg by rolling backwards. Try that. So as you move your leg, and some people are rolling backwards as the leg moves forwards, and some people are rolling backwards as the leg moves forwards. What's the right thing to do? The leg is long, but not stiff long. Okay? So the constraint was stay on your side. So stay on your side, lengthen your upper leg, and move it a little forwards and a little backwards. We're trying to move your leg is long, so it's not so bent. The hip is not so bent. The right leg is still on the ground. Your upper leg is lifted away from the ground. Okay, rest a minute. We need to kind of clarify something for some people. Rest a minute. Could you imagine that you were standing up and you were standing, you're lifting your right leg onto a step and your left leg is long. It's weight bearing. Could you lie like that? But you're lying on your side. So you've got to transpose your understanding of yourself in a different in a different relationship to gravity. So your left leg is long, and keep it long. Put your foot on the ground. Yep. Now for your leg to be a standing leg, it would need to be in line with your body. If it was forwards of your body, you'd be bent over. If it was backwards of your body, you'd be falling backwards if you were doing the action. Now lift your leg like that and make that little pendulum movement. And just see, do you have a bias moving forwards or backwards? Or can you find some way to do it where you could move backwards and forwards equally and equally easily? So there's a movement in your hip joint. You may feel there's movement through your torso. That could be a rolling movement, or it could be a folding and extending movement. Okay, rest. Put your right leg on top of your left. Sorry, your left leg on top of your right. And just pause there for a moment. And then lift your whole left leg again. And listen to how you lift it now. No, just away from your right leg. So as it lies, lift it and lower it. And just notice, has it got heavier or lighter? And lift higher, lower. Maybe you're doing it very differently. Now keep your left leg on your right leg and lift your foot away. Just lift your left foot away from your right and see how you do that now. What do you feel happening in your hip joint? Good. And roll over and lie on your back. So we're going to keep this as a one-sided lesson. So notice what exploring the movements on your left side, what difference has that made in your experience of yourself, your sidedness, your contact with the floor? Maybe it's balanced you, or maybe it gives you a clearer contrast between the contact of your left side and your right side. Sometimes my clients say they feel like they're on a divided highway. One side's lower, one side's higher. Or there can be more volume, more length. Or they feel the shortness, the other side. Roll your left leg a little inward and outward. Just notice how you sense, what you sense now as you do that. Any movement in your hip joint, any clearer? On what you felt or might have sensed yesterday? And then leave that and try it on the other side. Can you feel a difference in the quality or the range? The weight or the ease? Okay. And slowly roll yourself to one side. bring yourself up to standing. And when you come up to standing, take a few moments. Firstly, without shifting your weight, just to notice how you experience the way you're standing on your 2 feet and the 2 sides of yourself in standing. What you felt, if you felt something on the floor, has that translated into standing? And then try shifting your weight a little bit. One way. Several times the same side. Did you choose the side that we've been working with, or did you choose the other side? And how do you sense yourself now being supported, connected on that side? Is it different to the beginning? Maybe it's more of what you already felt, or it's different. And then try several times to the other side. And then begin to walk. And each time you stand on your left foot or stand on your right foot, what sense of yourself, of your stability or connectedness do you have through yourself on that side? Okay, we're going to take lunch now. So we'll come back at 1:30.